All hail to Stephen King. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Moonlight Library. Welcome back or welcome for the first time. So today we're here for a ranking of the Stephen King books that I have read, which is a pretty okay amount, honestly. Also, I want to talk about books that are on my Stephen King TBR. Not all of them being physical TBR. Also, I want to talk about the books I have DNF'd by Stephen King. Sorry, but it happens. Before we get to that though, hold your horses. Let's start with a little bit of background on Stephen King himself, whether it be him as a person or what people say about his writing, what I think about his writing, and then we will rank and talk books. So let's go. Stephen King, obviously he's written tons of books, like 60 or so books in his lifetime. He's been publishing since the 70s, his first book being Carrie. We'll get there. Talking about Stephen King's background, I feel like there are a couple things that I always think about, which is his addiction period, whether it be drugs, alcohol. He was in that was back in the 80s, and he has even said that he doesn't remember writing Cujo and probably some other ones, and you can see it in some of his work around that time period. Just a difference in how he was writing, and obviously it's because getting to his brain. Then later he got into a car accident. He was walking near his home. I think this is in the late 90s, 1999. He's walking by his home and he got hit by a van. I heard that his pelvis was shifted sideways because of the hit and he could have died. This goes into a little bit of Dark Tower, which we'll get to later as well, and how he wrote that. A lot of that trauma and recovery ends up coming into what he wrote. It's kind of weird that he got into the car accident after writing Misery, because I always thought that Misery was partially based on this car accident, because if you have read Misery or seen the adaptation, you would kind of hear from this story, oh, that kind of sounds like Misery. Interesting. Something I hear quite often on BookTube and just book criticism in general when I hear people talking reviews, especially on Stephen King, while this is about Stephen King, I hear about a lot of specific things. I mean, there's a full list of what people could critique Stephen King for, but I'm going to focus on a couple of them, just kind of like brush into them. His books are extremely long and they are long-winded. I know there are a couple of them that people are like, you could have cut some things out of this. Like, obviously It is enormous. The Stand is enormous. But then also Salem's Lot, really big book. And I've heard time and again that the first third, I haven't read it, but the first part of the book, which is like a chunk, is difficult to get through because it's slow. And why do we have a novel that's this big, that this much of it is difficult to get through? Another thing is the endings of his books. Stephen King, I believe, has even said that he has difficulty producing an ending for a book. Like, the whole book, we're having a great time reading it, and then you get to the end and it just plummets a little bit. Well, not really plummets, but doesn't feel like a full conclusion or the best conclusion that you want from it, leaving you with a dull taste. And the last one, this one specifically, I hear all the time on BookTube, and I can see it as well. It's something that I've looked into time and again and reflected on in my reading of Stephen King, is the portrayal of women and minorities. This can especially be found in his earlier works. But I've heard that in his newer books, which I have not read that many of his newer books, he has become a little more nuanced, and maybe he hears the criticism or just the changing of the world in general. And maybe he's changed as a person, kind of. I'm not sure, but I always hear, and I've seen flat female characters, extreme violence towards women, stuff like that. Let's get to the rankings. I just want to throw out there, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and be sure to like, comment your list of what you've read by Stephen King, and let me know an order. Like, give me a little tier ranking. Even if you've read 2 books, put them in order of which one you like more. If you've read 1, just put 1, this one. I have read 10 actual books by Stephen King. We're going to go from the best to the okay ones. And okay might mean I hated it. I hated it. Yeah, just a little spoiler. So I'm going to also give you a little synopsis, but also my opinions. Hi. No. The first one is 11/22/63. This school teacher, his name's Jake, he regulars this diner, frequents this diner, and this guy at the diner owner is dying, and it turns out he's been going through a portal back to 1961 or something, and he's been trying to stop the assassination of JFK, and then he tasked Jake with doing it. And Jake is a history teacher. Yeah. So I feel like, firstly, this is another one that's really long, but it makes sense because we have to go through so much history within it. And if you're not familiar with the assassination of JFK, then that is very helpful because there are a lot of players in that. It is big time paranoia, conspiracy pilled in a way. It's like, I don't think anyone thinks, well, someone probably does think that a time traveler killed JFK. You know, I have a really good conspiracy theory for y'all, and I'm going to say it at the very end. So we'll get there. I wasn't going to bring this up, but then I was like, wait a second, I really want to. It's a Stephen King conspiracy theory, and it's very real world. Anyways, this doesn't feel like your typical Stephen King book, though. It seems like it'd be really slow, but it's actually like a really good, almost road trippy story, because an adventure story in general, because he's going through all these areas and you're kind of learning about the times and stuff like that, and just politics at that time too. Maybe a little refreshing right now because the politics we have right now are, that is my number 1. I gave it 5 stars. Number 2 is, it's obviously it. Like, it has to be it. If you've read it, I'm sure you love it. If you don't, then I don't know what to tell you. It is this group of children back in the 50s, 60s. I think it's like 60s and 80s. It's a split dual timeline. Most likely, if you haven't read it, you've maybe seen the adaptations, whether it be Tim Curry one or the more recent one that is like a 2-part adaptation. There is a creepy clown called Pennywise, which very much so fits into the Stephen King universe, because there's a whole Stephen King universe with a lot of lore, a lot of gods and whatever weirdness that is very part of the Dark Tower. It's too much information, but let's go forward. Pennywise preys on your fears and kind of feeds on it. And then we have a group of children that, yes. So my opinions on it, though. I love the Losers Club. That's the group of kids. I think they're really quirky. Yes, I didn't grow up back then, but it has a sense of nostalgia to it. It's a small town vibes to it. It might be super long, but it is actually scary. It is kind of trippy at points almost. It is surprising, especially one of the ending scenes that people have probably talked about that's extremely problematic. And yes, we just kind of pretend it didn't happen, especially the adaptation did also pretend it didn't happen. If you don't know about that, you can look it up. I said to one of my friends, she was reading it, and I was like, oh, did you get to the part blah, blah, blah? Because she was at the very end. And she was like, you're kidding. That doesn't happen. That can't happen. And I went, oh, sorry. And then she came to me later and she was like, Rachel, that happened. Anyways, so we pretend that didn't happen. Number 3, I kind of thought about not putting Dark Tower books into this because it doesn't really make sense, and I haven't completed the series, so I'm going to give you a little Dark Tower in this right now before we get to number 3, maybe. So Dark Tower's his, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 books series. Maybe it's an 8-book series. And this harkens back to Stephen King's Accident. I think he got into the accident maybe after the 4th one or the 5th one. And at that point, he felt like he had to complete it as fast as he could, basically, because his mortality became real. And a lot of people feel like it was rushed, got really weird, and it just completely different. I've only read the first 3 of them. There is a reason to that, and that's because the 4th one is basically a side story that I have had difficulty reading. That should be my DNF one. Huh. I didn't put it in there. I'll bring that up. Anyways, doesn't matter. The other thing is about the Dark Tower, I've heard, this is not a spoiler, but in the last one, it comes back to the criticism of Stephen King is the fact that he can't end a book. Like, he's bad at it. And so I've heard, which I have not read it, but I've heard that right before the ending of the last Dark Tower book, he has a step back and says, this is the ending. You could either just not read the ending or read it. Sorry if I didn't do a good job. I'm paraphrasing. I have no clue what it actually said, but it's within that vein. Anyways. So my 3rd book is actually the 3rd book in the Dark Tower series. That's The Wastelands. So Dark Tower, I think I have to tell you what Dark Tower is. So Dark Tower is him writing his universe, basically creating his universe. And it's kind of like the reality between alternate realities that ties all of the lore and legend of Stephen King together. And we're following this guy, Roland, on this quest to the Dark Tower and the people he meets along the way and the things he has to get up to, blah, blah, blah. So the 3rd one is, it's Roland and the people he's traveling with now. And there is a talking train. Monorail. Anyways, his name's like Blaine the Mono, I think. And he likes stories. So it's so good. Like, I really enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun. There was like riddles. It was paradoxical at times, has kind of like a butterfly effect thing happening. There are so many different elements, and we're definitely getting into, okay, I really like these characters and you're really pulling me into the story. You're doing a great job, Stephen King. So the 4th one, step away from Dark Tower for a second. We'll come back. So the 4th one is Misery. And this one I brought up to you earlier. Famous author gets in a car accident, and Annie, I think her name's Annie or something, Annie Wilkes, she takes him in to help him. Well, no, turns out she's a really big fan. Maybe too big of a fan. Yeah. She really wants him to complete his series. It's horrifying. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. It's so unsettling. Everything he has to go through in this book, that people could be like this, is just completely horrifying. I think I saw the adaptation before I read the book, and the adaptation's really good. If you haven't seen it, it is a classic. It's a classic with Kathy Bates. We love. Hey, it's your pal editing Rachel. I thought I pressed film. I didn't. There are issues with me. Anyways, I forgot to mention that I've read The Mist. I literally own it. I think I was even holding it in the stack that I took my thumbnail photo with. There's something wrong with me. So I would have ranked this probably under Misery. It's this short, sweet little kind of almost novella that, no, I guess it is technically a novella, isn't it? It's like almost 200 pages. It's 200 pages, so maybe not a novella. There's a mist that comes into town. These people get trapped in a grocery store. If you go out into the mist, So I liked it. I read it on my couch one day in like probably one sitting from what I remember, but it feels like a really good rainy day book or foggy day. I don't really experience foggy days where I live, and you can hear my roommates, so bye-bye. The next one up is another classic that has a classic adaptation and a very not so good second adaptation. It's Pet Sematary. The second adaptation, I was like in a really cold movie theater and I just wanted to leave the whole time. It wasn't very good, but it might have been how cold it was. I don't think so. I think everyone hates it. Let me know if you didn't hate it. So this is a family moves to this kind of small town, and the house they end up living in is right next to a highway, but then there turns out like their cat dies, and it turns out, why don't the neighbor's like, you should take it to the pet cemetery, and then it comes back to life. And what's gonna happen with that? Sounds like a bad idea. I feel like Misery's more so the horrors of humans, whereas this is reaching into more the supernatural, like scary pets, scary children. There's a lot of stuff going on here. It is disturbing, and yeah, I don't think it was as good as I thought it was going to be, though. I had like very high expectations for this book, and that might be partially my problem. Number 6 is The Drawing of Three. Might say 3, but it's the second book in the Dark Tower series, Back to Dark Tower. This one is Roland starts to meet his companions, and he's like going through these doors to experience their lives or something. It's wild. It's really good. It is so interesting. The characters are interesting. Their lives are interesting. And just the way they end up melding. It's so good. So then we have number 7, The Outsider. This one also has an adaptation, and it is a miniseries with Jason Bateman on HBO. It has to do with a small town. Little boy dies. Everyone thinks it's the T-ball instructor or something. It is investigatory, which I like. I really like. It has supernatural elements, but there's just kind of this, like, it's not as good as I think it could be. And it is one of the more recent Stephen King books I've read. I haven't read too many recent Kings. Really, only 2 of them are from the 2000s. Oh, no, 11/22/63 is more recent too, which is amazing. On we go. So number 8 is The Gunslinger. Yeah, this is towards the end of the list, and don't assume that I liked it. The Gunslinger was boring. This is the beginning of Roland's journey to the Dark Tower. It's funny, we're going backwards. So obviously they get better as they go, and then they get not as better as they go. The Dark Tower is boring, it's slow, it's not very big, but even with its size, it is hard to enjoy, unfortunately. The next one's Elevation. It's this man who's losing weight but not mass, and he starts floating. I don't remember. It's really short. It's not like new, but it's newer for Stephen King. He's written like 60 books. I didn't love it. I felt like the characters were flat. The story was not very compelling. Maybe should have been in a collection of his and not a standalone. I've never read a collection of his, so maybe that's where the trash goes. Anyways, let's go to number 10, which, wow, Rachel, you have problems. It's Carrie. I hated this. It's like supernatural prom bloodbath, but it's told in newspaper clippings, and it's found footage in a book, but not very good. It's just kind of there. I didn't enjoy it. Barely remembered it. I remember the movie more so than that with Sissy Spacek. I feel like I have an awkward time saying that. Funny, she's also in the show Castle Rock, that is like we take Stephen King and we put it all together. It's good. It's on Hulu. You should watch it if you haven't. Bill Skarsgård's also in it, and this is before he played Pennywise, so we love him. So you should watch it. I don't care. Watch it. Next up, sorry, but we have some DNFs, and it's all a little sad. Honestly, it's a little depressing. It's a little bit like, Rachel, get it together, girl. So the first one, well, actually, let's say the first one is the fourth Dark Tower book, like I said before. It's a side story, and Wizards in Glass, something like that. It's a side story. It is just, I had a hard time. Maybe someday, or maybe I should skip it. Let me know if you've read Dark Tower, and if I could just skip it. Would that work? Is that a bad idea? That sounds sacrilege. Next up is The Shining. We all know this one. Jack and his family go to work at an off-season ski lodge, chalet, whatever place, big place, and hotel. You know, we have creepy little Timmy, Tommy, whatever. And they have The Shining where they're like, what? That was a really good explanation of The Shining, and I should be quoted. So go ahead and you can use that as a quote. You just quote me. So that's fine. I've started this book so many times, and it's not that I don't like it. It's just that every time I start it, I never finish it. Well, I get distracted. I just get distracted. Someday I'll read it. Someday I'll actually sit down and read the entirety of The Shining, but not right now. I had to throw my copy out. It got I've never had a book get that destroyed. It was bad. And it was like a really cool classic one. I think it just had really old paper though too, because the paper was just like falling apart. So the next one is Firestarter, which is also one of his earlier works, like very earlier. Drew Barrymore is in it as a little girl. I had an ex-boyfriend that used to read me books, and he was reading me this one, but for some reason we never finished it. So I couldn't even tell you. I don't even know why I didn't finish it. I know why I didn't finish it. It was because he stopped reading it to me, but I don't know why we stopped reading it. And then I've also read a couple of his short stories. So I've read You Are. I really enjoyed this one. I think he's an English teacher or something in high school or something like that. He gets this Kindle, it's pink, and it can let you read any book in any alternate reality. So say there's a reality where George R. R. Martin has actually finished A Song of Ice and Fire. You could finish it. You could read Winds of Winter. You could read A Dream of Spring in this Kindle. And wouldn't we all love that? It sits you down and you're like, oh, what if blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah were friends? Or like, what if this and that never happened? So then the other one is Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which is in the collection, which is different seasons, but I didn't read the whole collection. I read this one for a book to film adaptation class in college, and I loved it. It was great. I had a really fun time reading it, and it just completely different from Stephen King. Obviously, everyone knows Shawshank Redemption, the movie. This is what it's based off of, which is crazy to me. When I found that out, I was like, this is based off a Stephen King short story? What? Okay, so finally, let's talk about my TBR, whether they be physical or not, like whether I have them or not. I'm not going to tell you because it doesn't matter. The first one is Talisman and Black House. This one is by Stephen King with Peter Straub, which I'm very interested in reading Stephen King writing with another author because I haven't done that. I would want to see like whether it can pick out some of what Stephen King was writing. Also, it sounds interesting. So it's this boy who's traveling through parallel timelines to save his dying mother. So The next one is Salem's Lot, which is about to have a TV show or movie adaptation. I don't really know which one it is. I don't know if it's already come out. I need to look that up. I want to read it. It's vampires, classic Stephen King, and I hear it's very much so a spanning epic sort of situation where you're following the whole town, you're looking through the whole town. Next is The Stand. That's very much so classic Stephen King, very big book. Post-apocalyptic, sounds amazing. I've always heard it's amazing, but it's scary because it's so big. I want to read On Writing by Stephen King because I've always enjoyed writing, and maybe someday I'll be a writer, and I would like to read this book. Next one is Fairy Tale. I don't know. There's something about this title that says, Rachel, I want to read this. That's it. That's really the whole reason I want to read it. I don't know anything about it. Dreamcatcher. I just told you I was hauling in another video. I didn't, because I don't know. I think it fell out of the basket, and I think it's a sign. I should keep it and I should read it. I heard it's not very good. So the conspiracy of John Lennon and who really killed him. Anyways, there is this website. It is called LennonMurderTruth.com. There is a man who believes, his name's Steve Lightfoot. He believes that Stephen King shot John Lennon, and he has an entire website devoted to it. There's also a booklet about it. If we toggle over to introduction, it is very long. Yeah, it's quite massive. Additionally, all of the links go to other pages that have more information on them. It is quite the rabbit hole of a conspiracy theory, and it's pretty interesting. I'm in no way saying this is true, but if you would like to go down a little rabbit hole and a very interesting and odd one, I would definitely say that you should look over here for a conspiracy that is about Stephen King. They even has a section on Stephen King's writing. Oh my God. Stephen King's letter to me. Yeah. Additionally, something about this is this man who believes that Stephen King shot John Lennon. He rides around in a van that is wrapped with a full explanation as well. And he passes out pamphlets and stuff, I think. He drives around the whole country. He has been to Florida. He's been to my library before. And one of my coworkers says he has a faint memory as a child getting into the van because there have been multiple iterations of the van and he'll let people in it, I guess, and he has more stuff inside. I really don't know. Strange. In the end, that's my ranking on Stephen King. Those are my thoughts on Stephen King. I'd love to hear what you think about Stephen King, what your favorite books are by him, maybe if it's one that I haven't read. And also be sure to like this video if you haven't yet. I would love that. I would appreciate that. And go read some Stephen King. Hopefully this will help you for your October reading. I love you as always, and thanks for being here. Bye.